I sat down with Alessandro Nesta, friend, brother, teammate, roomie, a man with whom I'd shared 1,000 adventures and about as many snacks. At halftime in one of our never-ending football games on the PlayStation, I confessed all. Sandro, I'm leaving. He didn't seem surprised. I'm really sorry to hear that, but it's the right decision. Milan is a little world apart, one that gave much more than it took and, without a shadow of a doubt, stirred strong feelings in me. Sometimes it was dejection mixed with sadness, other times raw emotion. At any rate, it taught me a valuable life lesson. It's good to cry. Tears are a visible demonstration of who you are, an undeniable truth, and I didn't hold back. I cried, and I wasn't ashamed to do so. This is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, I Think, Therefore I Play, by Andrea Pirlo.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. And as sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Our goal is to help you learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and then condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You gain not only the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. So listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields. So Duncan, tell the listeners a little bit about Andrea Pirlo.
Pirlo is a professional football player, aptly named the Maestro. He's considered one of the greatest midfielders of all time. He's known for his vision, his technique, creativity, his passing, and his free kicks. There are many superlatives that you can throw around about this man, Greg, but I think it's safe to say he is simply one of the footballers that people love to watch the most. He is a purist. He plays the beautiful game in a beautiful way. And Greg, as a former player yourself, maybe not quite to Pirlo's level, what are your thoughts on him?
How dare you not put me in the same bracket as Pirlo? That's an absolute scandal. For me, he, as you say, is one of the greats. It's just a player that makes the game look easy. It looks like he's never gets out of third gear, that everything's just slow around him and that everything's so fast. Except him, it just looks like he's going at his own pace, almost like he could play with a cigarette in his mouth and a brandy in his hand.
That's a great way to put it. So here are a list of his accomplishments. He won Serie A in Italy 6 times, that's the league title. He won the Coppa Italia twice, 3 times the Supercoppa Italia. He won the UEFA Champions League with AC Milan 2 times, 2 times the UEFA Super Cup, and 1 time the FIFA World Club Cup. Internationally, he played for Italy in 116 matches, which puts him 5th all time. He represented Italy in 3 World Cups and 3 European Championships, which in itself is a remarkable feat. He won the World Cup with Italy in 2006 and was a runner-up in the European Championships with Italy in 2012. In the Olympic Games, he was a bronze medalist in 2004, and he won the UEFA Under-21 Championships in 2000. In terms of individual awards, I'll keep going here. He was Italian Football of the Year 3 times, Serie A Team of the Year 5 times, UEFA Team of the Year once, UEFA Champions League Squad Team of the Year once. He was in the FIFA All-Pro 11 in 2006. And a stat that probably highlights that midfield maestro that we talked about, he has the highest passing accuracy in Serie A history with an average of 89.5%, which is quite remarkable in terms of completions.
That is outrageous. That's a number that you'd see probably from a centre-back who just plays 5-yard passes to his other centre-back. For it to be someone who's an attacking player and executes so many unbelievable passes, that's a crazy statistic. So we've learned a little bit about the man there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this book?
So I really enjoyed this book, and I encourage all the listeners to go out and get it. He is very ethereal in his explanation of his career, and he also very witty, but it's certainly not a linear autobiography, which made it an absolute nightmare to pull together for this podcast, if I'm honest. Similar to a few of our other performers that I can think of, for example, Kobe, Alex Honnold to a degree, and I throw Ronnie O'Sullivan in there. So listeners, I'm going to give a very high-level career arc just to set the scene, but the major content of the book jumps around a lot. Like always, we're not going to try and convey everything in these books, but rather pull out the lessons from their journeys that you can apply to your life. So Pirlo started his professional career at Brescia, which is an Italian club, in 1995. He moved to Inter Milan in 1998 and then was loaned back to Brescia and also then Reggiana, eventually settling back with Inter Milan. In 2001, he transferred to cross-city rivals AC Milan, where he had a lot of success over the following 10 seasons, winning the Champions League with them twice. In 2011, at the age of 31, he moved to Juventus before finally switching to New York City in 2015, where he played 2 seasons in the MLS before he retired. The book itself was published in 2014, so misses out on his New York days, so I apologize to all you MLS fans, but I think we can safely say that the MLS was not the highlight of his storied career. And lastly, throughout his career, he was a staple of the Italian national team, like I mentioned, playing in all the major tournaments. So Greg, let's start here with how he saw himself and how those around him saw him. He says, as a kid, and then as an adolescent, I tried to rail against a concept conveyed through few different words. Unique, special, preordained. Over time, I learned to live with it and used it to my advantage. It wasn't easy for me or for the people who cared about me. From an early age, I knew I was better than other players. And for that very reason, tongues were very soon wagging. So Greg, we've just listed all his accomplishments, but it seems from an early age, he just stuck out like a sore thumb. He knew he was different talent-wise, and so did everybody else.
This is pretty common, I think, particularly in the world of soccer, where we see people that are really good at really young ages. But what makes him special here is that he's got this awareness of his own talent early on and a sense of uniqueness that he probably wasn't always comfortable with. And just having that label of special or preordained, that can carry a really, really heavy amount of weight, especially when you're young and obviously still developing your identity inside and outside of football. So I think this perception from other people probably influenced not only how he saw himself, but also the expectations that he felt as he's grown and he's developing as a footballer. So I think, interestingly, that early knowledge that he considers himself different could go either way. For some, it becomes a real source of pressure and resentment, and it can pin them down. But for Pirlo, it seems like he found a way to channel it into confidence and really drive to refine his craft, particularly as a young player. And I imagine that there's a real process of maybe reconciling that identity, which ultimately may have strengthened his focus and resilience as a young man.
That's an excellent breakdown. We're going to hear a little bit more about that process. And he says, everyone talked about me, too much in fact, and not always in a good way. On more than one occasion, my dad Luigi had to leave the stand where he was watching and flee to the other side of the pitch to avoid hearing the nasty comments made by other parents. He got out of there to avoid reacting, or perhaps to avoid becoming too sad. He had nothing to be ashamed of, and so he ignored them, striding away even faster than an Italian Forrest Gump. Unfortunately, not even my mum Lydia had been spared the angry outburst. Who does that kid think he is? Maradona? That's the line they use most often. Spurred on by their jealousy, they'd say it deliberately loudly, trying to provoke a reaction. They didn't seem to realize that they're actually paying me the biggest compliment. Maradona, for fuck's sake? It's like calling a basketball player Michael Jordan or a top model Naomi Campbell. They'd got it all wrong. I didn't have the slightest intention of behaving like a superstar. The truth is a lot simpler. That's just how I was made. I was acting on pure instinct, not riding a flight of fancy. I'd spy a pass, the chance to bring out a trick or an opportunity to score, and it was already done. I'd outpace even myself, especially when it came to thinking. Even in those early days, I was someone who always had to deliver, always had to maintain high standards. For everyone else, it was okay to have an average game. If I did, it was a failure. Greg, what's your reflection on this section?
I think that's a really interesting passage, and it captures the weight Pirlo bore from a really, really young age. Not just the pressure of being talented, but also the, I guess, unintended backlash that came from it from other parents. And his family's experience speaks volumes, and they loved and supported him and obviously went to watch his games, but they had to endure constant scrutiny and jealousy, it sounds like, from the other parents. Pirlo's dad avoiding the stands to spare himself these comments, and his mother facing the snide remarks, those reactions from others, just highlight how isolating it can be for a prodigy. What strikes me, though, is how Pirlo didn't set out to appear special. He just played from instinct, and I really liked the way that he talked about that process. His talent wasn't necessarily about proving a point or performing for other people. It was just about responding to the game in the best way that he felt, the way that felt natural for him. But I think the weight of always having to perform to meet a bar that's always going to be higher than his peers turned every game into a real test for him.
So as a follow-up, I'm sure Pirlo did put in the hard work, but we're talking a lot about what we call natural talent from an early age, and that term talent is certainly loaded.
It certainly is. I'm not a lover of talent, and we could spend hours unpacking talent and skill and kind of comparing and contrasting those two things. When people talk about the idea of a gift, something is just given, and he used the term preordained there, right, where it's just kind of almost the chosen one. I don't agree with that. Some people will have usually physical characteristics that set them apart at a particularly early age that are useful. When we talked about Michael Phelps, you just need to look at Michael Phelps's anthropometrics, is that the right word? The right word? The kind of size and shape of his body. It's like he's designed to be fast in the water. Alex Honnold, if you've ever seen his hands, he's got hands like shovels. Those things help. So I think there are things that people get that you might consider talent, but what's more important is how that talent is actually challenged. So we talk about talent being really complex, and sometimes it's got that mystical quality, and you either have it or you don't have it. But I think Pirlo's experience here really highlights how natural ability can become a blessing and become a burden all at the same time. So for him, talent wasn't something that he was consciously cultivating at first. It was just the way that he experienced the game. It was just him doing his thing, being completely in sync with it. So this kind of highlights for me how talent opens doors, but it doesn't guarantee a smooth journey here. It's still the foundation which you've got to build those countless hours of effort and practice and training. And perhaps even more importantly, you can really build an unbreakable mindset here. So while talent might seem like the starting point, it's really how it's handled, how it's channeled, how it's developed that ultimately defines where it goes.
I love that one phrase, Greg. Talent opens doors. And I think that's a great one to leave us with. So to lead us into the next section, we want to hear how Pirlo saw his own talent. And he says, I conducted a long and silent discussion with my inner self. Looking back, it bordered on madness. Andrea, a gift like yours shouldn't be a millstone. It's true, you're better than the others, and you should be proud of that fact. Mother Nature was kind to you. She was on good form the day you were born. She gave you the magic touch. Now go and take advantage of it. You want to be a footballer? That's the dream that's attached itself to you. The others want to be astronauts, but you couldn't give a fuck about going to space. Well then, go and pick up the ball, give it a stroke, it belongs to you. The jealous folk don't deserve it. They're trying to steal that special part of you. Smile, be happy, make this moment brilliant, and then make many more just like it. The people giving chase will soon fall behind. It's written in the stars. Go, Andrea, go. Greg, do you want to go to space?
That might be the only thing that him and I have in common. I couldn't give a fuck about space either, to be honest. I think, what this paragraph really highlights for me is that he acknowledges I don't love the word, but we'll call it a gift, I guess, the gift that he's been given by Mother Nature, and also the unique challenges that come along with that. And there's a definite tension here that he confronts between feeling burdened by the talent and recognizing that it's something extraordinary for him, a magic touch that he calls it. And he's telling himself, you've got something rare, something that other people won't have. Don't let their jealousy or expectations get you down. But he's also turning inward, and I think he's finding his own voice and perhaps a purpose here, or a drive outside of what other people say, what other people think. And what he's saying to himself is, this is mine, and I'm going to use it for my joy and for my dreams. That mindset, seeing talent as something to celebrate rather than to hide, I think is probably transformative for a young player. And particularly for him, I think it allowed him to step away from needing validation and instead to create his own standard and his own motivation that he can use to drive himself forward. So it shows the importance of this inner dialogue, and it feels almost like it's a rite of passage for him, where he stops viewing his talent as something that he owes to other people and starts seeing it as his own to cultivate, to cherish, and to share on his terms. So bigger picture, he's recognized that his journey wasn't about meeting anyone's expectations, but about honoring the potential that he knew, even at this young age, that he had within himself.
And I think that inner voice that he mentions, a lot of times when I speak to athletes, I call it that internal narrative. What are you saying about yourself? And his internal narrative is all around his gift, that he believes that he's special. And of course, maybe there's a self-fulfilling prophecy in there.
There's a lesson to be learned. What's the story that you're telling yourself?
Absolutely. And he goes on and he says, even today, I'm not completely convinced I'm unique or irreplaceable, but I struggle to explain that to people who are used to making superficial judgments about me. I have reached one conclusion though. I think I've understood that there is a secret. I perceive the game in a different way. It's a question of viewpoints, of having a wide field of vision, being able to see the bigger picture. Your classic midfielder looks downfield and sees the forwards. I'll focus instead on the space between me and them, where I can work the ball through. It's more a question of geometry than tactics. The space seems bigger to me. Greg, for me, this captures what makes Pirlo so special. It's about his vision.
And I think that's if you talk to anyone who knows and has seen him play, that is what makes him great. What he calls his vision is what separates him as a great player from the very, very, very good players. But what he does is he finds those hidden spaces and the small gaps and the opportunities that he can unlock a defence. So he's operating on a plane where the game isn't about simply following tactics. It's really about mastering bigger, sort of more meta skills, spatial awareness, intuition, timing. And all of this contributes to his ability to see the bigger picture, which, didn't make him just a good midfielder, but an absolute orchestrator of the game. It's almost like he could feel the field, not just see it. And I love that idea of seeing it as almost a maths problem, like a geometry problem. And as the saying goes, he's playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
I love that. And Greg, there's a little reflection from Pirlo about the other players in the Brescia youth teams. They weren't bad kids, the one I played with in the Brescia youth, but they did have a very serious problem, one that always got the better of them. They were running scared of their own dreams, dreams that weighed them down and eventually crushed them. They thought of me as the boogeyman, someone trying to kill their future. I held out my hand to drag them up, but they instead turned their back on me. They fell behind, then pulled out of the race to become professional players. For me, it's always better to keep chasing down the guy in front of you and maybe finish second rather than stopping altogether. It's a shame they never understood that. Greg, we've said it before, everyone wants to be great until they figure out what it takes. And what it takes often involves confronting your fears, and the other players were struggling to confront their fears in terms of their own ambition to be professionals, it sounds like.
This is a really insightful reflection here, Duncan. He sees how fear can paralyze his ambition, and even for really, really talented young players. For his teammates, the pressure of their own dreams, that can be really overwhelming. Turning what you'd like to consider would be a really motivating situation into something that could be really crippling. And instead of seeing him as an ally, as a teammate, as something that can be as an assistance to them, they start to see him as a threat, the bogeyman, right? I think was the phrase that you used. And it almost becomes a little bit combative, like he's there to try and ruin their chances for them to progress into the professional ranks. But as we often say, there's enough success to go around, and it isn't a zero-sum game. But I think what Pirlo's shown here is he has a fundamentally different mindset. It's a mentality that separates those who persevere from those who sadly, as he puts it, let fear pull them out of the race.
Greg, that leads so nicely into this next short section where he talks about how he frames individual ambition within a team setting and team success. And he says, I can't abide by the cliche, only the team success matters. I don't care about my own. It's a tiresome complaint of those who have no personal ambition, whether for want of class or lack of character. For me, the team counts a huge amount, but I don't forget about myself. I'd be doing my teammates a disservice. Many individuals make a team. Just as many dreams make a triumph. And if you're really lucky, they make history as well. So Greg, in most walks of life, we have to function as part of teams. And I'm not just talking about sport teams. So what can listeners take away from this idea of individual ambition within a team setting?
I think the key takeaway for listeners from what I've pulled from this is that obviously teamwork is essential, but it doesn't mean you have to erase your own individuality or suppress your own ambition. In fact, your personal drive and growth contribute directly to the success of the team as a whole. So in any setting, whether it's business, creative project, coaching staff, sports teams thrive when individuals bring their best selves to the table. So that obviously means you're pursuing your own goals, honing your skills, striving for excellence in whatever it is that you're trying to do, not out of selfishness, but because your success amplifies the collective effort and continues to drive the team forward. So while we would also say you can't get rid of the team's ambitions and focus purely on yourself, you can't get rid of your own ambitions and focus purely on the team's success. There has to be a blend there. And at times it's going to probably be a little bit like a dimmer switch. It's going to be sometimes a little more you, a little less team, at times a little more team, a little less you.
Yeah, I love that idea of a dimmer switch. So it's a great kind of analogy we can put to that section. And there's a little bit here about that individualistic mindset and how it plays out in terms of practice. And ultimately learning from others, he was a free kick specialist. And this is kind of where the obsession with that skill starts. And he says, back in those days, I'd buy Gazzetta dello Sport just to get my hands on the videos they sold with the paper showing the best free kicks from the great number 10s. I'd press play and Baggio, Zico, Platini would spring into action. Great invention, the remote control. One push of a button and your imagination runs wild. Antonio Augusto.
It's Antonio Augusto Ribeiro Reis Jr.
Quite a name there. Thanks for helping me out. A midfielder who's gone down in history as Jorginho.
Still, you got that wrong. You got that wrong as well. It's Juninho, not Jorginho. Come on, son.
Jorginho. Oh,
He's gone down in history with the wrong name.
There we go. Every day's a school day. Anyway, so back to the section. I studied him intently, collecting DVDs, even old photographs of games he'd played, and eventually I understood. It wasn't an immediate discovery. It took patience and perseverance. From the start, I could tell he struck the ball in an unusual way. I could see the what, but not the how. So I went out on the training pitch and tried to copy him, initially without much success. In the early days, the ball sailed a couple of meters over the crossbar. The misses went on for several days, and by that time, the bloke in charge of the kit store was getting somewhat peeved. For him, it was a case of too many lost balls becoming a ball ache as I persisted with my experiments. Days soon turned into weeks. The best ideas come about in moments of total concentration, a state you can reach when shitting. That's correct.
This has been translated from the Italian, correct?
Yes. A state you can reach when shitting. My own eureka moment arrived when I sat on the toilet. Hardly romantic, but there you go. Juninho's secret had become an obsession for me, to the extent that it occupied every waking thought. It was at that point of maximum exertion that the dam burst, in every sense of the term. Apologies, listeners.
Oh, this is amazing.
Great.
Hey, listen, when inspiration strikes, man.
I'll just stumble through these next two sentences. He said, the magic formula was all about how the ball was struck, not where. Only through Juninho's toes came in contact with the leather, not his whole foot as you might expect. So, Craig, we're talking about free kicks here, just in case we've lost the audience.
There's a good possibility we've lost the audience at this point.
Again, he's talking about free kicks here. And of course, he's doing exactly what we do on performers. He's learning lessons from the best that ever came. And Juninho was really widely regarded. I think he still holds the record as the most professional free kick scored in soccer.
He might well do, and that some of those, I'm sure we can put a link in the show notes of some of his free kicks. That, like, the distance that he struck the ball from as well was outrageous. It was funny. It was kind of like he was taking a penalty, but for obviously from outside the 18-yard box. But going back to what Pirlo's talking about here, I think what this does is it captures his level of obsession and persistence to really truly master a skill and to stand out. I mean, he's talking about thinking about this while he's sitting on the toilet. If that isn't obsession, I don't know what is. So it's not just about the raw talent, because obviously he's very good at this point, but it's really about that relentless curiosity and experimenting day after day and having repeated failures over and over again. But it shows how greatness often comes from that really insatiable desire to learn and improve, to apply those things that he's seen from Juninho, someone who's phenomenal at the skill that he wants to get better at. We've talked in previous episodes about modeling. This is a perfect example of that.
So obviously a lot of our listeners are perhaps not soccer players. So what are the lessons that our listeners can take from this idea?
That's a great point. So lessons here go far beyond soccer. First of all, learning from other people is universal, whether it's analysing a competitor in the business world or shadowing a mentor. We've extolled the virtues of having a mentor untold times on here. Consuming great content, like performers, you got to get your little plug in there. You can accelerate your growth just by learning and watching from the best. Emulate what the best do, and you're not going to go far wrong. Second of all, embracing failure as part of the journey and recognizing that it's going to be there. And this applies to all performers in all performance domains, business, coaching, any high performance, hell, any performance arena. It doesn't even have to be high performance. Failure is where the most valuable lessons are found, but we've also talked about the importance of applying those lessons after you've learned them. It's no good just learning the lesson without the application. The final point for me is just the power of obsession and focus. We've seen across numerous people that we've talked about on this podcast, it's a trait that's shared by top performers everywhere. And for a coach, it might involve innovative training methods for a business leader. That might be refining strategy or helping to develop communication skills within your team. But the key is fully committing to the process of improvement, recognizing that it's going to be a little bit rocky, but you're going to get there. So no matter the field, for me, the takeaway is the same. Excellence. It's built on curiosity, resilience, unrelenting drive, and just a desire to learn and improve. And I think that's a mindset that every single performer, every one of our listeners can adopt.
That's a phenomenal summary. I kind of threw you a bit of a grenade and you've had to
a little bit. I appreciate that. Thanks.
So I know we've been all over the place here, listeners. Thank you for staying with us. So jumping back into his career, because Pirlo was so good, he quickly moved through the ranks of the Brescia youth teams, and his unofficial mentor was coach Maestro Lucescu, I think it's pronounced, who's Romanian, and he brought him into the first team of Brescia at the age of 15, and he found himself training alongside seasoned players in their 30s, some of whom were less than thrilled with his presence on the field, and he'll tell us about that here. He says, "They were twice as old as me, and on some days, twice as nasty. Andrea, keep playing like you did in the youth team." That was the first phrase Lucescu whispered to me, and like a good little soldier, I obeyed. Not everyone took it well, especially the senior players in the dressing room. They were among the most listened to and respected out on the pitch, and they were like old men compared to me. One day I took the ball past one of them 3 times in a row. The 4th time was fatal. He committed the worst foul of all time, carrying out a premeditated assault on my ankle. There was no point trying to make out that he hadn't meant it. Nobody would have believed him. He too thought I was acting like a superstar, when in reality all I was doing was following Lucescu's instruction. The coach gave me a wink and said, "Don't worry, everything's fine. And make sure you try that again, please." Thanks, coach.
Get hacked to bits every time you get the ball.
He spoke to me with kindness, then turned on the rest of the team. He said, "Give the ball to Pirlo. He knows how to look after it." So, Greg, he's 15 and he's playing with fully grown men here because of his talent and obviously not necessarily because of his physical stature. And perhaps unsurprisingly, we also saw this in episode 10 with Pele, who's again regarded as one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest. And he made his first team appearance at Santos at the age of 15 and ended up playing for Brazil at 16, which is crazy. And a few other performers I reflected on. Marc Messier consistently played up age groups and played pro hockey when he was 17. Michael Phelps, who you've already mentioned, when he was 15, he competed in the Sydney 2000 Olympics and was also a world record holder when he was 15, which is absolute madness. There's a lot of examples that we've seen of athletes playing up age groups.
It's fascinating to see how these, and I call them prodigies, right? Pirlo, Pele, Phelps, Messier, they're all thrown into the deep end of competition here with seasoned adults while they're in their teens, but being younger and often, naturally less physically developed, yet expected to perform at that really high level. It's a unique experience. And I think it has a really profound impact that shapes these athletes. So again, a Pirlo story here highlights how brutal this environment can be and really underscores the need for parents and coaches to, I guess, weigh the advantages and disadvantages. What are the challenges going to be if we're talking about pushing young talent into full-blown adult competition? So moving from juniors into seniors is a huge step. So I think ultimately the focus shouldn't be on age, but on ability and competitive level. The old saying goes, if you're good enough, you're old enough. So, an example you brought up, Michael Phelps again, there's a little point in his story continuing to compete against other high schoolers at 15 when he was already one of the best swimmers in the world. That's not really setting him up for success. That's not who he's going to be tested against. So you might as well just continue to practice with older players, more experienced, let's face it, probably better players, if that's the level that you're going to be expected to perform at. And that's what we're seeing here.
So ultimately, he does break into the Brescia first team. And in 1998, he signs for Inter Milan. By then, his former Brescia coach, who we just mentioned, Lucescu, is now the coach at Inter Milan, and he signs Pirlo. And he says, "They were my team as a kid. When I was an ultra with a dummy," and ultras are their kind of crazy fan base for those that don't know. "My absolute idol was Lothar Matthäus. He was the number 10 who scored goals and inspired the rest. For me, there was nobody better. The time I met him on holiday and I got his autograph was, for a long while, the best and most important day of my life. After Matthäus came Roberto Baggio, just as well I had a big bedroom, so that both their posters would fit on my wall and I didn't have to pick which god to pull down from Mount Olympus. You're an Inter player. You've done it. I might not have looked it, but I was the happiest man alive, proud of having thrown myself into the world shown in those posters. I wanted to stick myself up on that wall. I was going to be a teammate of Ronaldo, Baggio, Djorkaeff. Me, the guy who now and again still went to games with a black and blue scarf around his neck. So, Greg, for context, unfortunately for Pirlo, there was a revolving manager's door at Inter, and over the next few seasons, there were 4 managers over the course of, I think, a season and a half, and he struggled to really solidify a starting role and was sent back out on loan by the legendary coach Marcello Lippi. He sent him to Reggiana, which I think initially felt like a big step backwards for Pirlo, but ended up being the right thing for him to get some games under his belt. Jumping ahead, he joins AC Milan in 2001, and it's at Milan where he really solidifies himself in the game and really regarded as one of the great soccer players, football players. While at Milan, he meets a pivotal character in his journey and in his story, and he says, "Big name collector cards sell season tickets, but it's the glue they have behind them that wins the games. The defense is the most important part of a team. In military terms, success starts in the zone behind the line. Put more simply, the team that concedes fewest goals wins the match. In terms of pure technical ability, Ronaldo, the real one, is the most gifted guy I've had the pleasure of playing with. He was an absolute machine. But overall, Paolo Maldini is the best. A defender, a peerless defender, the best defender going, both physically and mentally. He had everything, and the enjoyment he got from playing was as obvious at 40 years of age as it was the first day I walked through the door at Milan. His passion is an example and an inspiration, a compass that I'll carry with me, not just for the rest of my playing days, but for the rest of my life. He taught me how to conduct myself, taught me how to win, lose, sniff out a goal, come up with an assist, sit on the bench, suffer, celebrate, play, behave, get angry, forgive, turn the other cheek, land the first blow, be myself, and sometimes someone else. Showed me how to stay quiet, speak, decide, trust, turn a blind eye, have both eyes wide open, take stock of a situation, act on instinct, stand on my own, welcome others in, be the captain, steer the ship, change the course, lead the way. Everything and the opposite of everything. Maldini is himself, and he's also a part of me. Craig, I love the saying, restock the stream you fish from, and Maldini is giving back to Pirlo. Just like I'm sure he's learned from legendary figures before him, like Franco Baresi and others. He's just pouring into Pirlo, and you can see what it meant to Pirlo.
So maybe me and Pirlo actually have 2 things in common now. 1, a hatred of space, apparently, and 2, Paolo Maldini, the greatest defender of all time, hero of mine growing up. And I was fortunate to go and watch an AC Milan versus Inter Milan game in the San Siro, went to the club shop, got a current at the time, AC Milan shirt and had Maldini's name printed on the back of it. I loved the guy. He was a real model for me. I thought he was amazing. And we've talked about the idea in previous episodes about the importance of relationships, and you've used the phrase before, relationships rule the world. And Pirlo's relationship with Paolo Maldini, it illustrates the profound impact of mentorship and the importance of having someone to show the way. Maldini here, he's not just a teammate, he is an absolute guiding presence. And when we talk about modelling, which we've talked about numerous times, embodying the qualities that Pirlo aspires to, both on and off the field, makes Maldini the perfect model here. So Pirlo learns not only the technicalities of football, which obviously he's very good at, how to set up goals, dictate play, control the game, but also the deeper lessons of leadership and resilience, Maldini's consistency, humility, passion for the game. So mentorship, especially in high-stakes environments, which we've talked about, provides more than skills or tactical advice. It's a compass, it's a North Star, it's a grounding influence. So he's unbelievably fortunate to have someone like Maldini to emulate, and it gives Pirlo an insight how to conduct himself, how to balance his self-confidence and his humility, how to lead other people with integrity. And the power of mentorship lies in this ability to pass on that hard-earned wisdom, to create continuity in values and standards, and as you talk about that, restocking the river.
Now, despite what a great mentor Maldini was, I couldn't help but include this next section about Pirlo and his thoughts on a warm-up prior to a match. It's one of my favourite bits in the book, and he says, One part of my job I'll never learn to love is the pre-match warm-up. I hate it with every fibre of my being. It actually disgusts me. It's nothing but masturbation for conditioning coaches, their way of enjoying themselves at the player's expense. I've no doubt it helps you avoid injury, but it's still the worst part of our working week. A 15-minute pain in the ass. I hate the warm-up so much I need to do something to avoid getting depressed. And so I'll run a mental countdown, continually reminding myself that I must stay calm, that in a few minutes the torture will be over. If you've got Bar Raffaele, the Brazilian supermodel, lying naked in front of you, you can't just wink at her and say, wait there, I'll be with you in 15 minutes. All you'll do in that quarter of an hour is think of her. It's exactly the same when you're about to play Real Madrid, Barcelona, or any other superpower. All you want to do is get stuck into them without any waiting around. You can't take your eyes off them and you begin to drool. You get so wound up thinking about what you're doing, and then you get downright angry because you realize you're just wasting time. So, Greg, it's a really funny section for me, but there's some lessons in there for the listeners, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Masturbation for conditioning coaches. That's such a wonderful phrase. But there are some real lessons here buried in this humour. For me, first of all, it highlights the importance of managing frustration, particularly in moments of preparation. So even though he finds warm-ups very, very tedious, he still recognises the value in obviously avoiding injury and being ready to perform at the highest level. But the takeaway here for listeners is not that every part of the process, whether it's in sports, business, any other field, not everything's going to feel exciting or meaningful in that moment. However, even the boring or frustrating tasks often serve a purpose. So success comes from embracing those moments and pushing through them, the really undesirable ones. Second of all, I think it's a lesson in channeling anticipation and energy effectively. So when he's talking about that analogy of waiting for something that you're really, really excited about, whether it's a match, another big moment, or sex with a Brazilian supermodel, the importance of staying focused and not letting your impatience take over. I think for listeners, this applies to any high-stakes scenario. You might want to jump straight into the action, but preparation, however mundane it might feel, really does set the stage for peak performance. And I think finally, there's a lesson in experimenting and finding mental strategies to cope with things that you don't like to do, things that you dislike. Pirlo's really, really simple. He's got a countdown method here. And while that seems a bit childish and quite humorous, it's an effective way for him to reframe the warm-up and to kind of change the meaning of that moment. For anyone struggling with tedious tasks, and I'm sure listeners have got tedious tasks piling up in front of them in whatever field of work they're in, small mental tricks to stay positive or continue to push through, these are the things that can make all the difference, especially when your motivation wanes.
Yeah, that's a real excellent breakdown from a pretty funny section. Jumping ahead, Istanbul 2005 Champions League final versus Liverpool. For context, AC Milan were 3-0 up at halftime and then go on to lose to Liverpool in a penalty shootout where Pirlo misses Milan's second penalty. The match, and I remember watching this, is probably the greatest Champions League comeback of all time. I think that's safe to say, to be honest.
Coming from a Man United fan, that's an interesting one because you had your own Bayern Munich one. We'll just lock that away. We'll lock that away in the archives. There, you heard it on tape here, world exclusive.
I'll take that. But I think it's important to cover this reflection for Pirlo because we're hearing about really difficult times, and we can also take lessons away from these. And he says, I thought about quitting because after Istanbul, nothing made sense anymore. The 2005 Champions League final simply suffocated me. How it happened, I don't know, but the fact remains that when the impossible becomes reality, somebody's fucked up. In this case, the entire team. When that torture of the game was finished, we sat like a bunch of half-wits in the dressing room there at Ataturk Stadium. We were bloodthirsty zombies faced with the unforeseen problem. The blood was ours, and they'd drunk every last drop. We couldn't speak. We couldn't move. They'd mentally destroyed us. The damage was already evident in those early moments, and it only got more stark and serious as the hours went on. Insomnia, rage, depression, a sense of nothingness. We'd invented a new disease with multiple symptoms, Istanbul syndrome. I no longer felt like a player, and that was devastating enough. But even worse, I no longer felt like a man. All of a sudden, football had become the least important thing, precisely because it was the most important. A very painful contradiction. I didn't dare look in the mirror in case the reflection spat back at me. The only possible solution I can think of was to retire, and what a dishonourable retirement it would have been. My last performance had been so comically pathetic. People talk about performance anxiety. Well, no performance anxiety is the perfect description of those of us who simply vanish from the pitch sometime during the final. I'll never watch that match again. I've already played it once in person and many other times in my head, searching for an explanation that perhaps doesn't even exist, praying for a different ending, like with those films you watch a second time, hoping that you misunderstood the final scene. Surely the good guy can't die like that. So, Greg, what lessons can the listeners take away from this really tough moment?
Yeah, I remember that game as well. I remember watching that in the pub, and it was just unbelievable to watch it unfold in front of your eyes. It was kind of surreal. So actually being on the field must have just been that times 10,000x, right? And I think his reflection here, it's very raw and it's very powerful, and it really does offer some profound lessons. It's a reminder that failure, especially on a grand stage, can really feel suffocating and all-consuming, particularly if it's something like this level of high-performance sport. His honesty here about the depths of his despair after Istanbul is something that many of us can relate to when we fall short in moments that matter the most to us. It's not necessarily going to be on such a big stage like that, but even things that matter to us are going to have this profound impact. I think it's proof that even the greatest can feel broken by failure, but it's also a reminder of the resilience that's required for you to move forward. The biggest takeaway here is that failure is an event, it's not an identity. What you do after the failure is the most important part. So he feels like he wants to give up, but he didn't. He went on, had to continue to have an incredible career, proving that really dark moments can lead to growth if you channel them in the right way. So the key is the process to it. Reflect on it, eventually find a way to use it as fuel, and actively pursue and correct the things that you want to correct. The lesson for listeners here is that failure is a teacher, and we can't change the past. All we can do is use it to shape a better future.
So, jumping into the future, and that's an excellent segue, and he says, we rose again 2 years later in 2007 when we beat the same Liverpool team in another Champions League final. We won in Athens thanks to an Inzaghi double. One of the goals was a free kick from me that hit off him and went in. The intensity of our joy was nothing compared to the deafening sound of our weaponry crashing to the ground a couple of years earlier. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, there was still a little warmth in the corpse at that stage, and as such, we celebrated but didn't forget. We wanted to, but couldn't. The stain remained. There are always lessons to be found in the darkest moments. It's a moral obligation to dig deep and find the little glimmer of hope or pearl of wisdom. You might hit upon an elegant phrase that stays with you and makes the journey that little less bitter. I've tried with Istanbul and haven't managed to get beyond these words. For fuck's sake. But Greg, I love that line. It's a moral obligation to dig deep and find a glimmer of hope or a pearl of wisdom. But he'll never forget Istanbul, will he?
No, Duncan, you're right. He won't ever forget Istanbul. And that's really part of what makes his journey so compelling here. It's not about erasing or eradicating that pain or pretending that the defeat didn't happen. It's about carrying it with you and using it in a way that fuels growth and resilience. And that line, it's a moral obligation to dig deep and find that little glimmer of hope or pearl of wisdom. That's incredibly powerful because it highlights how even in really, really dark moments, we have a responsibility to ourselves to try and find some meaning and to grow from that meaning. So what's really striking for me here is the balance that he strikes between redemption and reality. So winning in 2007 against a very, very similar Liverpool team, I'm sure there was a couple of player changes, brings some joy and some closure, but it definitely doesn't erase the pain of 2 years earlier in Istanbul. So for Pirlo and for anyone facing a moment of deep disappointment, the lesson here is clear. It's obvious. You don't have to forget the pain to move forward. You can let it shape you, you can let it teach you, and ultimately you can let it make you stronger. The joy of redemption, that's never going to fully drain out the echoes of failure from those 2 years ago, but it can entirely coexist with them. It offers proof on how far you've come as an individual, and maybe that's the real victory. Not forgetting it, but growing because of it and despite it. And as they say, we're always going to have disappointments and things that let us down, but always, as they say, a foolish man complains about torn holes in his pocket. A wise man scratches his balls.
You heard it first on Performers. A foolish man complains about torn holes in his pocket. A wise man scratches his balls from Dr. Greg Young.
You can quote that 2024.
So, Greg, in between those two Champions League finals, as we discussed, which were 2005 and 2007, in 2006, he also plays in a little game called the World Cup Final. By the way, that is some 3-year stretch. Two Champions League finals and a World Cup
Aye,
final.
that's not bad going, that is it.
So I love this. About the World Cup final, he says, I don't feel pressure either. I don't give a toss about it. I spent the afternoon of Sunday, July 9th, 2006, in Berlin, sleeping and playing the PlayStation. In the evening, I went out and won the World Cup.
So that's amazing.
So, yeah, he was pretty relaxed. So, Greg, this next section takes us to the World Cup final. And for context, it's 1-1 after extra time. Anyway, in this section, it really captures Pirlo's mindset during probably the most pressure-filled moment in all of sport. It's the penalty shootout in a World Cup final. I don't know that there's a bigger moment or bigger pressure-filled moment in the whole of sport, so we're going to go through Pirlo's reflection on this moment. And he says, thinking about that World Cup final against France, there's a moment that feels very much my own. When Marcello Lippi, the Italian coach, came up to me at the end of normal time, you're first. We both knew what he meant by that, first to take a penalty. Being first on the spot, kicking off that torture in the biggest, most incredible game that a player can play or imagine, that's not necessarily good news. It means they think you're the best, but it also means that if you miss, you're the first on the list of dickheads.
That's an interesting mindset here. I love that. The first on the list of dickheads. It's a really interesting, fascinating look into how elite athletes handle super intense, pressure-filled moments. I mean, it's very hard to do, and this is why we have a really hard time practicing these skills, because all you can do is imagine standing there in the World Cup, right? You can't put yourself in that position. So knowing that you're the first penalty taker and you're trying to set the tone for the entire team, you've got the hopes of the entire nation. Marcello Lippi's choice here is a real double-edged sword. Being first means that you're the one that the coach trusts the most, and like you said, you're probably the best. But it also means you shoulder the greatest risk if you miss. So there's the balance between the kind of the honor and the dread here, and not everyone can handle that. But it's exactly what separates good players from absolute legends. We've seen great players crumble in these moments, and we know it's not just about technical ability. Every player in that game can kick a ball 12 yards. That's not the question. It's about having the mental toughness to perform when everything is on the line.
And he says, I'll go right, no left, because that's the keeper's weaker side. No, I'll put it in the top corner. There's no way he's reaching that. But what if I get it wrong and the ball flies off into the stands? My thoughts were all over the place, drunken ideas at the wheel of Fairground Dodgems. I really didn't know what to do. But the worst was still to come. When a match is decided in that way, a man against millions, with the keeper trying to save a nation, there's a sadistic group ritual that leads you to your fate. It's a sacrificial procession that beckons you to jump on board. The two teams gather in the centre circle, and the next player up has to make his way from there to the penalty spot. It's an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. It's barely 50 metres, but it's a truly terrible journey, right through the heart of your fear. The comparison with the dead man walking, pulling himself along the Green Mile is exaggerated and not the most appropriate, but it does get across the idea. I got up to head to the spot. It was my turn, and I acted on instinct. I'll hit it straight down the middle. Put a bit of height on it, Bartes will definitely dive, and there's no way he's getting to it, even with his feet. That moment really is torment, a blizzard of agony. There's a storm raging inside and all around you. The journey from centre circle to penalty spot was crammed with violent emotions. I opted to walk slowly. On some kind of subconscious level, I didn't want to miss anything. I wanted to take absolutely everything from that moment. I vowed never to forget that little outing that went beyond everything and turned seconds into hours, and each step into a dramatic tale. Oh, Greg, there's so much in this section. I think it's beautifully written, even if it did come across so in my reading. So, one, I want you to reflect on there's the decision of where to put the ball, and from Pirlo, it's not premeditated, which is perhaps contrary to what we might hear as advice these days. And two, there's this dreaded walk from the centre circle to the spot. And he's ultimately aware that there are billions of people watching, and I'm not exaggerating that. There are billions of people watching this World Cup final. The enormity is, like you said, it's really difficult to fathom in that moment.
Yeah, it almost feels like you're getting away from playing the game and you're playing the occasion or playing the moment here. And I love this passage. It's loaded, it's got raw, unfiltered emotions that I think you can only get with such a monumental moment. So as naturally his mind's in overdrive and he's torn between that instinct and indecision about, where am I going to put this penalty? And I like that. I like that phrase. He describes it as a drunken idea at the wheels of fairground dodgems, which really shows how even the best players can feel overwhelmed by the stakes. He's taken numerous penalties. We're talking about him being a dead ball specialist, so it's nothing new to him. But this situation is, and it's interesting that he ultimately decides based on instinct rather than committing to a spot beforehand. Like you mentioned, something that he might have done in practice over and over and over again. He's just going to do what feels right to win that moment.
So, Greg, I wanted to ask you, I know you've taken a few penalties from your playing days, perhaps not at this magnitude, but did you have a plan or were you a little bit more in the moment, I'm going to decide?
No, I always had a plan. I was very much out of the sort of the Alan Shearer school of taking penalties, and it was no surprise where Shearer put it. He put them reasonably high and kind of to his left across his body as a right footer. And I used to do that, and I used to take penalties after every training session with our goalkeepers, and they knew where I was going to put them in. I just said, listen, just don't cheat. What's interesting here is then the walk up to that penalty. So it's very different in a game as opposed to a penalty shootout. In the flow of a game, there isn't this gulf between you and the rest of your team and everyone else on the halfway line. Everyone else is around the sort of the 18-yard box, and it feels a little bit more, or a little bit less rather, isolating. Taking a penalty in a penalty shootout is so isolating. It is literally you, and you feel like you're on an island. Obviously, I haven't taken a penalty of this magnitude, but I've been in those kind of situations before, and it is really, really hard to just turn the voice down in your head, to kind of turn that noise down. And it sounds like he's got a bit of a process to do this. And obviously we'll find out whether or not that works for him.
I was in the penalty box holding my breath. I picked at the ball. It was as heavy as the pressure bearing down on me from all sides. I tried to catch Buffon's eye, which is the Italian keeper for context. I could have done with a nod, a little gesture, a little bit of advice, anything. But Gigi had enough problems of his own to worry about, and didn't have any time for mine. Caressing the ball was something I had to do. I then lifted my eyes to the heavens and asked for help, because if God exists, there's no way he's French.
I agree with that.
I have to agree. I took a long, intense breath. That breath was mine, but it could have been the manual worker who struggles to make it to the end of the month, the rich businessman who's a bit of a shit, the teacher, the student, the Italian expats who never left our side during the tournament, the well-to-do Milanese signora, the hooker on the street corner. In that moment, I was all of them. You won't believe me, but it was right in that very moment I understood what a great thing it is to be Italian. It's a truly priceless privilege. Never would I have thought that this instant before taking a penalty could open my mind so marvellously and give me this higher understanding. My penalty went in. Even if I'd missed, the lesson would have remained. Perhaps it would actually have been amplified by the resulting desperation. It's incredible to know that what you're feeling is shared by millions of people in the same way, at the same time, for the same reasons, in the cities that moments before were rivals, or at least too dissimilar to find any sort of common ground. That lukewarm shiver of a second before I struck the ball in the net is the most vivid sensation I've ever felt. Greg, this moment seems incredibly profound for Pirlo.
Absolutely, Duncan. This is one of those transformative moments that we talk about in sport where the weight of the experience goes beyond the moment in the sporting competition. So for Pirlo, the pressure of that penalty was almost unbearable, the way that he describes it. And he talks about carrying the weight of the nation and feeling that really, really deeply. And the way that he describes kind of wanting to sign a little bit of support from Gigi Buffon there, his goalkeeper, and then realising he's completely alone, that isolation, that really heightens that sense of isolation and responsibility that he's feeling, particularly as the first penalty taker. But then in that instant, as he steadies himself with that deep breath, which you and I both know is an absolutely key mental skill, something extraordinary happens here. He feels that unity of Italy becoming almost a vessel for the entire nation. So his words here show that in that critical moment, he wasn't just taking a penalty for himself, but for everyone. He talks about the manual labour and the teacher and the businessman, everyone from all walks of life. And it's rare for me to hear an athlete describe that feeling of being so profoundly connected, I guess, to a cultural identity. And it's powerful, and he calls it a priceless privilege, and I really like that phrase, to be Italian in that moment. It's not just about personal achievement, but it's about that moment of shared pride, the hopes and the struggles of millions on his shoulders. And it's moments like this that remind us that sport's phenomenal. The game isn't just a game, it's a connection to something much, much bigger.
Another excellent breakdown and a great lead into this section where he talks a lot about that pride, I think, that you just alluded to, about playing for Italy. And he says, my first experience of international football was with Italy's under-15s. And since then, I've never looked back. I've ticked every box along the way. I think of it as a ladder where you can't see the top, but you're well aware of the plaque positioned on the bottom rung. Paradise this way. And he continues, it's no coincidence that such overwhelming emotions come from wearing the Italy shirt. Blue, the colour of the sky, and the sky belongs to everyone. Even when it's covered with clouds, you still know it's there. Being part of a team that belongs to everyone makes me feel good and at peace with myself. It relaxes me. A lot of the time, it's better than sex. It lasts longer, and if it all falls flat, it isn't just your fault. Take someone like Antonio Cassano. He says he slept with 700 women in his time, but he doesn't get picked for Italy anymore.
That's such a good dig.
Deep down, he can't really be happy. I certainly won't be. That second skin, with its smurf-like blue, gives you a whole new image across the world. It makes you better, takes you to a higher level. Much better to be a soldier on the pitch than in the bedroom.
I've always said that.
Yeah, much better to be a soldier on the pitch than in the bedroom. Great line there. So, Greg, we've heard from several of our performers about that extreme pride, and I think you just mentioned cultural connection to representing their countries. Some of the performers I reflected on, Agassi talked about being overwhelmed winning the Olympic gold for the US. We have Pele's godlike status in Brazil. Abby Wambach talked about that real deep connection with the US women's national team. Bubba Watson talked about his immense pride playing Ryder Cup. And of course, Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, whose career were really based around representing their nation. And certainly, last but not least, I think Dan Carter, he had that deep cultural connection, which, has always existed between the All Blacks rugby team and the nation of New Zealand.
Absolutely, Duncan. I actually think there's a really nice parallel here with Dan Carter and Andrea Pirlo here. The All Blacks are called the All Blacks because of the jerseys and the kit that they wear. Pirlo talks there about that sky blue Italian shirt. They're known as the Azzurri, right? That is the kind of the cultural aspect of pulling that shirt on. That's what is really, really important here. It's not just the shirt, it's what that shirt means, that national identity that's behind it. They're people that you can rally behind no matter who you are or where you come from. It's why moments like that penalty from Pirlo for Italy or Simone Biles performing for the USA, those things resonate so deeply with us. They're not just sporting events, they're literally shared national experiences. And in these moments, the athlete and the nation, they kind of almost merge and become one, and it creates a bond that's powerful and endearing, and we remember these sporting moments.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown. I think there's something just incredibly powerful how sport can connect and bring countries together. And I don't know how to make this transition, but we're going to make it anyway. And we're going to jump ahead. And he signs for Juventus in 2011. And this is really at the tail end of his career when some people, and I'd say some people, especially at AC Milan, thought that he was past his best. He was 31 at the time. And he says, the president, Andrea Agnelli, and I hit it off straight away. Agnelli made an excellent first impression on me. And I'd like to think the feeling is mutual. It was footballing love at first sight, something that was in no way guaranteed when you considered where I was arriving from. As I got to know him, I've realized that we have one thing in common. As soon as he wins a trophy, he immediately wants to win another. He's never content to settle. He's quickly learned how to beat the big guns. He's also given Juventus their old mentality back. It's one that really used to get on my wick as an opposition player. You always knew that they'd fight to the death and give every last drop of sweat. They'd never hold back. They'd get kicked and they'd get straight back up again. They'd score a goal and you just knew they'd get another a few minutes later. You tried to intimidate them and they'd just get angry. And when they were angry, they seemed to perform even better. So, Greg, this bringing back of an old mentality certainly paid dividends. And between 2011 and 2015, Juventus won Serie A 4 times in a row, as well as Coppa Italia, and they're in the Champions League and were runners-up in 2014, 2015. So it was a really unprecedented run of success for Pirlo in particular, as people thought he was on the back end of his career.
Yeah, bringing that back to Juventus, another classic nickname, the old lady. Right? That's how they're referred to. Fantastic nickname. Bringing those back to kind of former glories a little bit, right? And an older player with experience coming in and do that. So I think this is actually a really fascinating turning point in his career, even though it's quite late in his career, and it highlights how the right environment can really reignite that spark and continue to promote that greatness. So the move to Juventus wasn't just about joining a new team. It was about really realigning with a mindset that matched his mindset and that real hunger that he's got for success. So the lesson here, I think, is the power of culture and leadership in driving and shaping performance. Agnelli didn't just build a strong team. Of course, they had unbelievable players, right? But what he did do is he restored Juventus's identity, that resilience, that grit, that refusal to settle, just kick us and we're going to continue to get back up and fight back. And Pirlo used to despise this as an opponent of Juventus, but it's now become a fuel for that incredible run of trophies that you just outlined. And it's a reminder that a winning culture isn't just about skill, it's about mindset, it's about persistence, it's about creating and fostering that high-performance atmosphere where players are pushed to their limits and beyond, and perhaps more importantly, supported in doing that. So for listeners, the key takeaway is the environment that you find yourself in, it matters immensely. So whether you're in sports, whether you're in business, any other field, any other performance realm, surrounding yourself with people who share your vision and push you to be better every single day, that can completely transform your trajectory. Pirlo, who obviously people thought was past his best at 31, he thrived in Juventus in that really demanding and ambitious culture. And this proves that even established, really high profile, really high performers, they can find new levels of success providing they find themselves in the right setting.
Yeah, I love that key takeaway that the performance environment really helps shape that individual performance. And for context, when we're talking about individuals, the Ballon d'Or, which is, for context, for those that know anything about football, it's an award by a French magazine, and it was started in 1956. And it's really given every year to the best European footballer, and it's often called the best player in the world. FIFA have their own World Player of the Year, but the Ballon d'Or really has that tradition, and it's the one that Messi and Ronaldo have been fighting over for the last probably 15 years now. So there's a little bit from Pirlo in 2012. Again, he's at Juventus now, and he says, "It's the most prestigious individual honor I never won, and yet I can't bring myself to get upset. They always give it to someone else, and I just shrug my shoulders. In 2012, hot off the heels of reaching the final of the European Championship and winning the Scudetto, I came 7th with 2.66% of the vote, practically nothing. Messi won with 41.6%, and then came Ronaldo, the other one. Iniesta, Xavi, Falcao, and Casillas. I'm fine with that. There's absolutely no doubt that Messi is number one, and as such, it was the right result. Over time, I've realized that managers, captains, and journalists on the international judging panel all have a soft spot for goal scorers. Prandelli and Buffon voted for me, but even I would have gone with the majority and chosen Messi. Granted, he's got people around him who run and sweat in his place. Happy to serve those they know are simply better. But to perform at that sort of level for so many years is beyond every other human being. As long as he and Cristiano Ronaldo are around, it's a two-horse race. I'm now certain that winning the Ballon d'Or is a bridge too far for me. It's a target I'll never reach, and I've come to terms with that."
Duncan, I think Pirlo's perspective on the Ballon d'Or, it's remarkably grounded here, and it has a certain level of humility to it. Despite being one of the best midfielders of his generation, he accepts maybe that the award is always geared towards goal scorers, and he knows that's not him. Those players whose stats make headlines, and you tend to find them on the back pages of the newspapers. So what strike is obviously Pirlo's genuine respect for Messi and Ronaldo, and I don't think he resents their dominance. Instead, I think he actually admires them in their consistency and excellence, acknowledging that their skill and, of course, they've had marvellous longevity, that places them on a different level. So he recognises that the Ballon d'Or isn't necessarily for him, but it's an understanding of his role, and perhaps it's an acceptance of his role. So he may not be the top goal scorer, but he's always going to be that architect, that orchestrator, the Maestro, we said, was his nickname, the player who evaluates the entire team and makes things tick. So this acceptance, it's not resignation, it's maybe an affirmation of the value that he knows he brings to the team. What is it that makes him unique? One that isn't going to win him lots and lots of trophies and accolades like this, but it's earned him massive amount of respect amongst the greats in the sport.
If I look in the mirror when I get up, or before going to bed, I see a man of average ugliness, with stubble, an unruly mane of hair, a squint nose, slightly protruding ears, and bags under his eyes.
Is this you or him speaking now? An unruly mane of hair. Sorry, it is. It's definitely him. Sorry, continue.
I wish I had an unruly mane of hair. But I also see a man who's completely happy with the figure staring back at him, who's proud of every single second of his past. And that is where we'll leave it. But as always, what are your top 10 life lessons from I Think, Therefore I Play by Andrea Pirlo?
Top 10 life lessons from I Think, Therefore I Play by Andrea Pirlo. Number 1, harness your inner dialogue. Self-reflection can turn talent into purpose and drive. He says, Andrea, a gift like yours shouldn't be a millstone. Go on, take that leap. Number 2, learn from mentors. The right guidance can shape your career and character. He says, Paolo Maldini taught me how to win, lose, sniff out a goal, suffer, celebrate, play, behave, get angry, forgive. Everything and the opposite of everything. Number 3, failure can fuel growth. Failure doesn't define you. It builds resilience and insight. He says, there are always lessons to be found in the darkest moments. It's a moral obligation to dig deep and find that little glimmer of hope or pearl of wisdom. Number 4, cultivate calm under pressure. Composure in high-stakes moments is a superpower. He says, I spent the afternoon of Sunday, July 9th, 2006 in Berlin, sleeping and playing the PlayStation. In the evening, I went out and won the World Cup. Number 5, celebrate collective identity. Representing something bigger than yourself can deepen purpose and pride. He says, the Italy shirt makes you better, takes you to a higher level. Number 6, find joy in the process. The work, not just the result, is what matters most. He says, back in those days, I'd buy the Gazzetta dello Sport and get my hands on the videos they sold. Pressing play, my imagination would run wild. Number 7, redefine teamwork. Individual ambition strengthens collective success. He says many individuals make a team, just as many dreams make a triumph. Number 8, embrace complexity in talent. Talent is a gift, but discipline and perspective, they make it shine. He says, I think I've understood that there is a secret. I perceive the game in a different way. It's more a question of geometry than tactics. Number 9, create mental anchors. Recalling comfort and memories can help you cope with challenges. And finally, number 10, pride without resentment. Celebrate the successes of others while honouring your own journey. He says, Messi won, and it was the right result. Over time, I've realised that the judges all have a soft spot for goal scorers for the Ballon d'Or.
Great, another fantastic top 10, but as always, we can learn from our top performers on the lessons to avoid. So what are your top 10 lessons to avoid from I Think, Therefore I Play?
Top 10 things to avoid from I Think, Therefore I Play by Andrea Pirlo. Number 1, succumbing to external pressures. Don't let others' jealousy or criticism weigh you down. Who does that kid think he is? Maradona? Number 2, neglecting mental preparation. Confidence in execution comes from mental clarity. He says, my thoughts were all over the place, drunken ideas at the wheel of fairground dodgems. Number 3, dwelling on failure. Reflect, but don't let the past consume you. He says, I'll never watch that match again, talking about the 2005 Champions League final loss to Liverpool. I've already played it once, in person, and many other times in my head. Number 4, disregarding routine tasks. Even boring parts of the process serve a purpose. He says, I hate the warm-up. It actually disgusts me. Number 5, stalling in a poor environment. Don't stay in situations that limit your potential. Number 6, losing sight of the bigger picture. Remember your long-term goals amid immediate frustrations. He says, make this moment brilliant and then make many more just like it. Number 7, underestimating the importance of patience. Rushing decisions or expecting immediate success can hinder long-term progress. He says, the misses went on for several days. Days soon turned into weeks when talking about practicing a new free kick technique. Number 8, being overly critical of yourself. Self-doubt can hinder progress if left unchecked. He said, I no longer felt like a player. I no longer felt like a man. Number 9, taking success for granted. Never stop striving, even at the top. Talking about his Juventus manager, as soon as he wins a trophy, he immediately wants to win another one. And finally, number 10, focusing only on individual achievement. Collective success is often more rewarding than personal glory. He says, it's no coincidence that such overwhelming emotions come from wearing the Italian shirt and that collective identity. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. If you enjoyed it, just as we did, we ask you one thing. Please share this episode with 2 people in your network. And for that, we are truly grateful. We will see you next time on Performers.